The global population continues to face many challenging situations daily. Climate change, financial losses, fear, anxiety, sickness, death. It may sometimes seem like this season of gloom will never end, and many are losing hope. The future may be daunting, but in the midst of your hopelessness, I can assure you that God, who is the creator of this world, still has the world in the palm of his hands, and for this reason, you can still have hope.
We want to welcome you again to the Wednesday night Bible classes for the STONECREST Church of Christ. It is a plum picking pleasure that is ours each Wednesday evening to be able to come into your homes, your studios, your cars, as you're driving along, as you are listening and are viewing these Bible studies. We appreciate so very much your consistent attendance in these sessions as we open up the Bible to see what God's Word has to say to us. We are in a series that I have entitled A Church That Flies. I have taken the metaphorical title from man's desire not only to fly with the birds, but like the birds. I have said to you over the last several weeks that there were a group of people in history named that were called the wing flappers or ornithopteris. I have said to you that man have always been excited about some kind of flying machine that could lift humans into the heavens and fly with the birds. But as the graphic portrays on the screen, most of these dreamers made the assumption that to fly meant to soar not just with the birds, but like the birds by flapping some sort of mechanical wings. In other words, if it was to function, it would have to be designed around the same form. That's the principle that I'm trying to get across to you for our examination in the weeks to come. That men assume that if you can reproduce the same form, that is, birds flying, then you can reproduce the same function. Men flying, machines flying. If you can produce the same form, then that form would somehow produce the same function. We saw historically that you don't reproduce function by reproducing the same form. That's why for thousands of years, men failed in their attempt to fly because of the assumption that to fly with the birds meant to fly like the birds. And so men had this notion that if we could reproduce some machine that could glide through the air doing this, if we can copy that form, it would automatically reproduce that function. And so after thousands of years of failure, the Wright brothers, among others, decided not to function on birds, but on the problem of flight itself. Rather than attempting to build a better flapper with some wings, with some feathers on it, they decided to pay attention and to study aerodynamics and wind and as a result of their study, they built the first wind tunnel to study the effects of wind on wings. In other words, uh, they changed the form. In other words, trying to develop something that did this, they studied the wind itself and how wind affects uh, flight and flying machines. Now, with a handful of aerodynamic principles that resulted from their wind tunnel and their studying the effects of wind on on flight, they came out with several principles, uh, and they came up. Watch this, with a design that didn't look exactly like what the birds did. And from that design that didn't look exactly like the birds, on December the 17th, 1902, Wilbur and Orville flew their Kitty Hawk Special. And watch this, they flew it 4 times. And the longest, as you see graphically portrayed on the screen, the longest of these flights lasted 58 seconds. Now come here, because now we're ready to delve into what I really want to talk to you about. Now I want you to watch this. That machine that they developed, that that lasted 58 seconds in the air. Number one, was not covered with feathers. It didn't have bird-shaped wings, and the wings did not flap up and down. Watch this. Watch the graphic. But it flew. Oh, come here. Let me try this again. I talked too fast for you right through there. The flying machine, the Kitty Hawk Special, 1902, wasn't covered with feathers. Didn't have bird-shaped wings. The wings didn't flap up and down, but it flew. Now, if you look at my screen right now, you'll see F-16 fighter. You'll even see Air Force One. That fighter jet accompanies the plane that the president flies in across the world. Now, come close. It didn't look like what flew from the Wright brothers. It wasn't shaped like the Wright brothers' flying machine. Watch this, but it flew. Different form created another function. That's what I'm trying to get to in this series of messages. Because in churches of Christ, we have stagnated ourselves. We have stymied ourselves, our growth, and our development, because while we have been fascinated, encouragingly so, with the first century church, we tried to copy, watch this, everything that they did in exactly the same way that they did it. But our issue is we're not functioning as they function. And one of the reasons for us is we assume like the ornithopteris, like the wing flappers, that if we can reproduce form, then function will follow. Now, uh, I need you to hear me clearly as I articulate and enunciate some things over the next several weeks. I want you to first of all hear me say that that I'm not trying to change doctrine. You don't change the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. What Jesus said is true. You don't change truth. You don't change the teachings of Jesus Christ. I'm not talking about teachings here, folks. What I'm talking about is methodology. I'm talking about being so tied to forms in the past that, watch this, that function in the past. But you and I have to understand this. We're living in the year 2024. I'm coming to you through an avenue, through a vehicle called streaming that wasn't even available to the church and to people for the most part, watch this, 25 years ago. You see, technology has enabled us, and you'll remember what happened at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, when this new strain of virus called COVID 19, the coronavirus, that our scientists and our technology and our uh, pharmaceutical companies and our medicine had no answer for. And it killed people by the millions, more than a million right here in the United States of America. In fact, some of you uh, were affected by that coronavirus. Um, and you and I know people. I did funerals, people who died from that virus. Well, that virus uh, forced the church to be more creative in the presentation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, because it forced uh, platforms like the one you are looking to right now. Had it not been for this platform, some of us would not have been able to worship God in spirit and in truth. And so the church had to, watch this, adjust. Watch it. We didn't adjust our message. Now, we adjusted how we present that message because you couldn't show up in church buildings. There was so much uncertainty around the virus that we couldn't meet together in groups in any significant number. And then when the church got together for some period of time, we had to wear a mask on our face because of all of the uncertainty surrounding the virus. Now, I said all that to say this. The church had to make some adjustments in how, watch this, the gospel of Jesus Christ is presented. Worship services were to be conducted. It wasn't a bad thing. Now, I will say this. It has made some Christians lazy. Preach that thing, Dr. Barclay. It has given some Christians excuses not to assemble with the saints. Now, therein is the danger in what happened a few years ago when the church couldn't get together. In fact, there were mandates, that there were certain municipalities and governmental entities that said you couldn't have more than 20 people in a certain location. Listen, I remember when I was doing funerals during the COVID, I had a mask on. Everybody else, had a mask on. People were sitting 6 feet apart. People were sitting that spaced out. Families couldn't get together and embrace one another, all because of the uncertainty of how this virus was spread and populated it. Now we know a whole lot more about it now than we did then. But watch it. Oh, my goodness gracious. We have to operate on the information that we had at the time. Now that our knowledge base is better, watch this. Listen, we did some things wrong. The government got some things wrong. Medicine got some things wrong. The pharmaceutical companies got some things wrong. But watch it. We learned from that. That's really what I'm trying to say in this series. That what the church has to be able to do is to shift. The church has to be able to adjust. The church has to be able to be adaptable, watch this, in terms of its methodology, in terms of its practice. How many times in the church have you heard folks say, we never did it that way before? We never had the coronavirus before. But watch this. Once we got it, uh, we had to adjust. We had to adapt. Some people have not adapted yet. The churches have closed because people did not know how to adjust and how to adapt. And then some try to fix the issue. No, we're not going to shut our doors. We're going to keep showing up. And people died in those congregations. And we all know better now. All of our perspectives are somewhat different now. That's really all I'm trying to say in this series. That I'm not talking about changing doctrine. I am talking about uh, being flexible enough to adapt and to adjust to some of our methodology. Watch this, in order for the church to soar, in order for the church to fly. And that's what this series is all about and what it is intended to be about. And I'm going to show you some things in the Bible. Watch this, where the first century church was able to adapt and to adjust in their own time frame. All right, now watch this. For the past 150 years, we, that is, church now, have looked enviously at the New Testament churches and coveted their ability to fly. Uh, if we could only reinstate the forms, function would follow. So the past 150 years have been spent analyzing the New Testament church for, watch this, marks of identity, for patterns of identity. In fact, I did some lecturing at a conference here just this past week. In fact, I did some lecturing in a conference, the Southeastern Regional Lectureship in Huntsville, Alabama, a few weeks ago. And I talked about some of these things. It was uncomfortable. Uh, no tomatoes were thrown at me, uh, but it was uncomfortable for some to hear because too many of us have been stuck uh, in the tragic trap of tradition. Now, folks, I'm not for throwing out all traditions. I am for understanding how those traditions got started, because whatever tradition it was, it came about because of a dissatisfaction of what was going on in the church at the time. And you have to examine that. Case in point, uh, uh, when I moved to Los Angeles, California in 1984, uh, every church that I had ever preached for uh, had Bible class midweek on Wednesday night. I mean, You know, I didn't ask any question. We just had Bible class on Wednesday night. They were having Bible class before I got to that church on Wednesday night. I didn't try to change that tradition. But an interesting thing occurred. When I preached for the Compton Avenue Church in Los Angeles, California, they would have Bible class when I first got there, and even when I left on Thursday night. Well, I had developed a habit for my own ministry. You know, I start preparing sermons. Uh, a certain day of the week, I'd start preparing for Wednesday night Bible class. You know, a certain day of the week, I do my counseling. A certain day of the week. But now, all of a sudden, those habits that I had developed had now to be adjusted and adapted, and I was uncomfortable with it because I had gotten into this routine. I had gotten into this habit. I knew Wednesday night was coming. I knew Sunday was coming. And I knew that I had to have preparations ready and prepared by Wednesday night. But now, Bible class on Thursday night. Well, it kind of pushed things uh, out of my comfort zone uh, with no intent to change the way that particular congregation did their midweek service on Thursday rather than Wednesday. I inquired about it. I asked the elders. Um, I said, you know, listen, just inquisitive here. Why do our church have Bible class on Thursday night rather than Wednesday night? The answer he gave me was simply this. I never forget it. Uh, Wonderful man of God, wonderful elder named Grady Bryan. Brother Bryan said to me, he said, Brother Barclay, now this is in 1984 when I moved there. In 1984, he said, uh, the reason we have Bible class on Thursday night rather than Wednesday night is because um, uh, Thursday is Maid's Day off. Yeah, you heard me right. Maid's Day off. Uh, there in California, a lot of African American women uh, worked as housekeepers for the wealthy and the well-to-do over in Hollywood. And many of the men worked as gardeners uh, in Hollywood uh, and in the Hollywood industry, the movie industry. And watch this. Thursdays was the day in which Hollywood and Beverly Hills and the well-to-do, where our people would work as as janitors, as maids, as gardeners in the Hollywood movie establishment. It was the day off, and when I heard that, I literally went to shouting, and he didn't understand the shout. Uh, he said, "Brother Barclay, why is that fascinating to you? I mean, you know, given your reaction here." I said, Brother Brian, uh, since uh, uh, Thursday was May's day off, that was a good time to have Bible class. Uh, and I said, you mean to tell me that, now this is 1980s, I said 100 years ago, and that's the time frame that he gave. Uh, you mean to tell me that our church had the kind of creative, visionary leadership to be able to set the time of worship and Bible study conducive to what the majority of the people were doing as a work profession, so they wouldn't have to conflict with that. It gave them time to be off. And so you took that time to have Bible study where there was no conflict in their work schedule. And he pushed out his chest. He said, yeah, you know, we had that kind of leadership. And I applauded him And I applauded them for being that adaptable and that adjustable. And then I asked him, 1984, how many of our people are still working in Hollywood? How many of our people are still working as maids and as janitors? See, in 1984, we were business owners. And it's not that we were not business owners within that time frame, but certainly by the 1980s, uh, uh, we owned some of the studios over there. Uh, and so, uh, see, what started out uh, as being real creative, now it continued as simply a tradition that no longer meted the needs of the people. That's the kind of thing that I'm trying to get at in this series. That we need to be adaptable and adjustable. Ministry needs to adapt. Church needs to adapt. Worship patterns need, I didn't say change, it needs to adapt. In fact, we're going through that right here on Sundays because we have our worship services at 9:30. Uh, and we have Bible classes following our worship services. And oftentimes our worship services bleed over into the time frame of the Bible class. So what? We have to adapt some things. We have to adapt how many songs we sing, how long the sermon can be, the announcements, meet and greet. And sometimes when we make these changes of adaptability, there are some folk who are just simply stuck. Oh, no. I got to meet and I got to greet. Well, listen, I love meet and greet, but these are the kinds of things that we always have to look at and have to be open to adjustment and to adaptability. And the same thing went on in the first century world, in the first century church. Now, um, and I want you to see what I'm about to say to you right through here. Too many of us like to think of the first century church and the first century Christians. I call them Fantasy Island Christians. Now, the graphic on the screen will be familiar to so many of us because we watched for years this little sitcom called Fantasy Island, where people with all of their troubles, with all of their issues, would fly onto this island in which their fantasies could be realized and fulfilled. Uh, Here's the only problem with that sitcom. Here's the only problem with that that weekly uh, show that came on for years, and people watched it by the millions. Just like that plane landed on Fantasy Island, after their adventure on Fantasy Island, that plane had to take off again back to reality. And too many of us have developed this Fantasy Island mentality of the church. I need to say to you, it did not exist then, and it does not exist now. Listen to me carefully. There was no model church in the New Testament. You look at any congregation, any church in the New Testament, each one of them will have problems unique to them. And we want to go, well, we want to be like First Century Church. Well, I hear what you were saying, but are you trying to be like church in Corinth? I mean, are you trying to be like church in Ephesus? Are you trying to be like the church in Rome? Are you trying to be like the church in Thessalonica? Are you trying to be like the church in Berea? Are you trying to be like the church in Philadelphia? Watch this. Name the congregation, and each one of them would have some problem unique to them because the fantasy island church does not exist. Didn't exist then, and it does not exist now. Just take the church at Corinth. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning 10 through 13. Paul is concerned that the church in Corinth uh, has more of an allegiance to their past preachers than they do to the Lord Jesus Christ. There were folks saying, I follow Paul. I follow Cephas. I follow Peter. Paul had to ask question, is Christ divided? Was Paul, was Peter, was James and John, were they baptized for you? Were you baptized in their name? It's in the opening chapters of the book of First Corinthians. By the time you get to First Corinthians, in fact, Paul is going to make this statement that it's not problematic, it's problematic out of context. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 17, Paul said, listen, Christ didn't send me to baptize, he sent me to preach the gospel. Well, that statement is to be understood in light of the fact that you got all of these people who have been following certain kinds of parties of Peter, of James, of John, of Paul, and they were identifying with the preacher that baptized them. And Paul said, listen, I thank God that I baptized none of you except Gaius and Stephanus and a few others. And so in that context, he says, listen, Christ didn't send me to baptize, he sent me to preach the gospel. Well, that's the same thing I can say. That Christ didn't send me to baptize folks. That is to do the physical act of baptism. We have other men here who can do that. My job is to preach the gospel. We're baptizing a gentleman this week. I'm physically not going to baptize him. One of our other men are going to baptize him, but I have preached to him and I have taught him the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what Paul was saying. So when you read 1 Corinthians, they're divided over preachers. By the time you get to 1 Corinthians chapter 5, there was a boy there in the church that had taken his daddy's wife. And you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, saints are suing one another in courts of law. You go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, they're divided over their misunderstanding of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, they're divided over the eating of meats that have been offered in idol sacrifice to some God as an act of worship. We go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. They had issues in paying the preacher, and Paul had to address that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. They're divided over spiritual gifts. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, they're divided over the misuse of the, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, they're divided over women wearing hats, and they're divided over the Lord's Supper. They're divided over men wearing long hair. And so by the time you get to chapter 12, they're divided over spiritual gifts. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, they're divided over the misuse of those spiritual gifts in the church, even to the point where their assemblies had become so disorganized to the point where he has to say to them in 1 Corinthians 14:34, that your women are taking over your assemblies. It's not even allowed for them to speak in church. And of course, he's talking about it in tongues there. He's not saying that women can't say anything in church, but that's how their assemblies had gotten out of hand. So 1 Corinthians chapter 12, they're divided over spiritual gifts. 1 Corinthians 14, they're divided over the misuse of those spiritual gifts in the church. And sandwiched between 12 and 13 is a chapter on love, where Paul is going to argue, I don't care what your gift is, if love is not the motivation for you using that gift, then your gift is of no good to God and to the assembly. And then in 1 Corinthians 15, They didn't understand the nature of the resurrection. In 1 Corinthians 16, Paul is going to encourage them to give offering to support the resurrection gospel. So watch this. In all 16 chapters, this one church has so many splits that even the splits had splits. And so all I'm trying to you is that there is no model church in the New Testament. There are things worthy of our imitation and emulation. But listen, when we are trying to copy their methodology, please understand something. You and I live in 2024. And the things we do in our culture, for instance, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, when they would do the communion, they would all drink out of the same container. They would all eat out of the same container. Listen, I preached in Africa, uh, and there are certain places in Africa that when you get ready to eat, everybody eats out the same bowl. I've had that meal. I will tell you, as much as I enjoyed the food, um, uh, I was uncomfortable with somebody else sticking their hand in a dish that I'm sticking my hand in. Well, you need to understand that the Bible was given in the context of a culture where, watch this, everybody could drink out the same container. You and I are not going to do that. Uh, because that's just not the way we do it in our culture. But watch this, we are mandated to do the Lord's communion every first day of the week. Now, for you to mandate that we all have to drink out of the same container misses the point. Well, didn't they do it then? Yes, they did it then. Because, watch this, that mandate was given to them in the context of their own culture. And in their culture, everybody could drink out of the same container and everybody could eat out of the same bowl of the same dish. Now, listen, I got my own plate. I got my own fork. I got my own knife. I got my own spoon. I got my own coffee cup. I got my own tea glass. Now, watch this. That's our culture. But the Bible wasn't given to us in the context of our culture. It was given to people in the context of their culture. What you and I ought to do is to get the principle. And what's the principle? The principle is that on the first day of every week, Acts 20 and verse number 7, we ought to gather to break bread together as an act of worship to God. Now, that's the mandate. That's the command. But now watch this, how we carry out that command, as long as we have the Bible prescribes elements, is left up to us. Whether you're drinking out of the same container, listen, if that's what you choose to do, God bless your heart. If I'm ever in your assembly, I'm going to get close to the front line. I'm going to be the first one in line, and everybody going to have to drink after me. Now, I'm being facetious on that. But the point I'm trying to make is a serious one, and that is that we must follow the mandate. We must follow the principle and understand that the principle and the mandate has been given to us in the context and in the confines of somebody else's culture. And so just doing that form uh, is will be unacceptable in 2024. It doesn't mean that we're going to function like they function. Now, watch this. Uh, the point for us is that when we take of the Lord's Supper, watch this, in a different form. That is, everybody's not drinking out of the same cup. Everybody's not eating out of the same dish. That's the form. What's the meaning of the function? When I take the Lord's Supper, watch this, I'm being mindful of several things. Number one, I'm remembering his own death, his own sacrifice, his own body, his own blood. I'm mindful of that, but I'm also mindful that this meal not only has to do with the past, it also has to do with the future. The meal reminds me that he's coming again, and he's going to eat this meal with us bodily present in the future. But then I'm also reminded that when I take the meal, there is a reflective look back. There is a prospective look forward. But then there is a, watch this, there is a present look where I look around to see whether or not I'm in right relationship with a brother or a sister, a husband or a wife, parents and children, your relationship. The meal is to function to help me to take a self-examination, an introspective look at myself. And if I am not in right relationship with a brother or sister, husband, a spouse, uh, a parental relationship with children, then I am not to eat. Because if I eat, all that means is I eat and I drink damnation to my own self. See, that's the function of it. Uh, uh, to be reflected, to look back. Uh, at Jesus' death, his sacrifice to produce this meal for us, to look ahead, to know it reminds me he's coming again, but then to look inside of me and to look around at my relationship. That's how the meal is to function. And if all we are paying attention to is just the form, uh, whether or not it's just one container or one dish, if you're just trying to recapture form, then you miss the significance of what the meal is all about. Hope that's helpful. Come on back next week and let us explore some other areas that would help us to uh, understand this whole notion about how the church is to fly and not just copy and form, but to be functional saints for the work of ministry. Until then, may the Lord of the harvest bless you, and may he bless you real good.